Today is going to be all about our GrowthLab Four for the challenges we see businesses of all sizes, all industries having in their business operations. And we're going to spend actually quite a bit of time over the next few weeks on the GrowthLab Four, from the jump to our podcast, so other events that we're doing. These really are four key areas, Dan, that we've really seen across our customers over the last 5 years, that we've kind of articulated down into these four things. We reviewed them last week and in the GrowthLab podcast, and we're going to do the same here. Kind of give you our framework for these, and then we'll dive into them as the weeks go on.
Yeah, I like the framework around these four areas to focus on, because it touches all different parts of the business. It's not just about accounting, or it's not just about finance. It's not about capital raising. It's not about bookkeeping, and it's not about tax. But these four things really embody people, customers,
Marketing,
accounting,
sales,
finance, marketing, and it's a great framework as you approach decision making. Right? If you look at decision making, somehow bucket it into these four things. How am I how am I making and losing money? Where's my cash? Where's my cash coming from?
Yeah.
How do I market for profit? More thoughtful revenue, right? Not just every revenue is the same. And then lastly, and most importantly, which is probably the hardest, and I don't think you can even do the last one without really thinking about where you're making and losing money, how you're marketing, and that's paying employees and team members for performance. And that's about aligning team members with company top level or even functional level
targets
and goals. Right. So this is always a fun topic for me. I get pretty passionate about it. So.
And for those of you that are joining us again, welcome back. For those of you for the first time, this is the GrowthLab Jump, how to jumpstart your week with practical advice. The practical advice is going to be a conversation between Dan and myself. And, this is looking to be things that you can do today, this week, to really get your teeth into your business.
Right. And one last thing, we actually came into the 21st century, and we upgraded our Zoom enterprise subscription to be webinar enabled. So that's pretty cool. To our participants, please feel free to send us a couple of questions. We'll try to make this interactive. We're not going to spend an hour here on a bunch of slides, but we will plow through some of these slides. So, yeah,
if you have any questions, put them in the chat feature, and we'll be sure to address them.
So I remember when we first met, like 5-6 years ago, we were sitting around a table. I think it was somewhere on the Cape with a close advisor, mentor of mine, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But he said to both of us, I probably had just recently met you. He said, you need to be able to distill these issues that small, medium-sized businesses have into these four buckets. And he's really the guy who sort of said, this is how you begin to think about your business and productizing, because the advice and the help that we can give businesses are multifaceted, right? And ultimately, you sometimes end up like running around in circles. This really keeps us focused on how we can best help our customers. So,
one of the things that we've built our advisory service on, even our bookkeeping business on, Dan, is that we're not just the numbers guy, right? We are not CPAs. We never will be CPAs.
We're not accountants.
We're not accountants. We are going to bring you practical advice to your business. We did recently bring on Steve Cummings as a tax guy, but the reason we brought him on is because he takes a look at the business first as a business, and how do I help you strategically achieve your business goals, not just how do I get your taxes done, or how do I get this submission done or this form done. Those are the things that need to happen. But if you have a business or not, it depends on the whole strategy behind it. So It's all about strategy first. So Dan did run through these. Just kind of touch on these again. These are the four GrowthLab Four, as we call them. Whether you're small businesses, larger businesses, you got to understand these things. It's just that the larger businesses have more resources, more people, more time to spend against each of these, and they've got whole divisions. So number one is understanding your cash flow. 2 is knowing where you make and you lose money. Three is in marketing for profit, not just revenue. It's more than just revenue. And the last one is that paying for performance. And it's not just about salespeople, paying salespeople for performance.
And these are truly 4 areas that all small, medium-sized business owners, management teams, they are challenged with truly understanding the what and the how around these 4 items. So this is going to be a good exercise. It's going to be, there's a lot to this, right? This is not just a one-time, one-shot deal. We'll probably end up breaking this out into a series with really focusing on each of the 4. So
the homework, your homework for today, after we get through this, your action item for this week is really to get to know the GrowthLab Four, digest each of them, and then determine your weak points and your strong points. But you use this opportunity to, as we go through this, we've got some structure behind each one of these. But the goal for today is to give you an overview, and so that you can come out of this and identify your weak points, so that as we go through the next few weeks, you can come out of that with understanding more clearly what it is you need to focus on and how.
cool. So this is probably the most important.
Cash is king.
Cash is king. And it's one of those places where, oh, but I have my books are tight. But why doesn't my bank account, why doesn't that translate into what I'm seeing in my P&L? My P&L is saying I'm making money, but in my bank account, I somehow have half the cash that I did at the beginning of the year. Like, what is happening here? And cash and profits aren't the same thing, right? Profits were meant, for the most part, I'd say 1 out of 2 companies are trying to achieve some sort of accrual-based accounting, and that's great. And I'm a big proponent of accrual-based accounting. It allows you to see things that you wouldn't otherwise see, especially trends, or if you're benchmarking against other companies that look like yours. But in order to run your business, cash is king at the end of the day. And look at the situation we're sort of in over the last 2 or 3 months. We're all scrambling for cash, and then we're making knee-jerk reactions, decisions on the fly,
like applying for the PPP loan,
or letting people go, or delaying this or delaying that. So I find that the underlying root cause, truly, of customers, small businesses not understanding their cash flows, because they actually don't understand their cash conversion cycle. And I see one of the participants on this call, Kathy Moore, and I remember with Kathy, this goes back probably now 6 years ago. It was a really hot August. And her issue to me was, and she's in a great business, right, where you have third-party insurance panels that are probably paying 80, 90% of her revenue. But she always said, my business is making money, but I don't see it in my bank account. That's when we began to talk about cash conversion cycle. Maybe
what are the questions that we always ask going into these conversations with Kathy, with any company when we're talking about cash?
First is, talk to me about your vendors. And of course, not every business is the same, because you'll have manufacturing, you have inventory intensive companies, you'll have CapEx intensive companies, right? None of that stuff really it doesn't show up in the P&L all in the same fiscal period, especially if you're driving towards accrual gap-based numbers. So it's important to understand, and this is great, right? Because it gets into the weeds of how your customers place purchase orders. And then how does that translate into you placing purchase orders with your vendors? How does that material or that inventory, how long does it stay on your shelves? And then how long is the sales cycle? How long does it take you to actually invoice and then ultimately get paid?
And it's not hard for that cycle to go from the start to finish to span 3 months.
Right. So if you I'm just going to run through a quick example that I did the other day. I said, if your vendors are, say, COD, for example, so you got to pay their invoices upon receipt of the goods, right? We're not even talking deposits, just ultimately on receipt. And your sales cycle takes, say, 60 days. And then by the time you actually close that deal, install the inventory, add the value add labor, takes you another 30 days. So now you're at 60 plus 30, you're at 90. And then your customers, especially in the construction-based business where, everything rolls downhill, now you're out 60 days waiting for that invoice to collect. Like, for simplicity here, it's like 90 and then plus 60. I mean, you're out 5 months.
Yeah,
right?
and the whole time your next project, or the project that was 6 months ago, is funding the new projects, right? And therein lies an easy way to see why your bank account is not reflecting that you're making money.
Right, so you're out 5 months, and then let's say your vendors actually give you a 30-day terms. So no, maybe instead of out 5 months, you're only out 4 months. But the problem is if you're a $1.2 million company, and you have $400,000, and you have 4 months worth of cash outstanding, that means you're turning cash 3 times, which essentially, boils down to, I've got about $400,000 baked into my working capital. Just to run a $1.2 million business, I've got $400,000.
Yeah,
what is the ROI on it? Right? You start thinking through that stuff. Now you can step back and begin to ask those critical questions around operations, CapEx, right? Begin to negotiate. Maybe it's improving your sales cycle, et cetera. So we can spend all day understanding your cash flow, but it comes down to one thing. Understand the cash conversion cycle of your business. It's so simple. You begin to understand how many times you turn cash a year in each of those critical segments.
So we do have a kind of framework on here of understand, design, implement, measure. I think today we'll spend most of our time in the understand category. But in just to run through these quickly, the questions that we've been hitting on here is, what are your needs? What are your goals? What are you funding? On the implement side, it's using a 13-week cash flow, 12-month cash flow. These are different tools that answer different questions and kind of highlight to the management team what the different needs of the business are in cash going forward.
Right. So it always starts with accrual accounting and then has to move over to cash accounting. I just had a conversation with a customer this morning, and we were talking about, well, I have all this cash in my checking account, but my P&L shows I'm losing money. I was like, well, you applied for the PPP loan, you got the money.
Yeah.
It's two separate things. Your balance sheet will reflect the monies you receive from the not your P&L. And it seems like, a very elementary sort of question, like everybody should know that, but it really isn't, because people 90% of management teams run their business based on how much cash is in their bank account.
And they're used to managing that way. So that mental note, they take a side angle glance at their balance, and it tells you how the business was doing the last X amount of days. Yep. And so with the PPP monies in there, it skews that for a lot of people.
So we do approach this with understand what it is, right? Understand that challenge. Like, to be able to get up to bat, you need to understand what exactly is the nuances of that challenge. Where does it touch? Now, in order to begin to understand, in order to begin to manage to this, now you need to have systems and processes in place. And that's why we lay this out as understand it first, begin to design how you can actually capture that and manage to it, implement it, and then no process is worth having unless you're measuring and measuring and measuring. So
I think knowing where you're making and losing money, it's one of the ones I enjoy the most, that and pay for performance. But, most likely, a lot of us have different divisions, business lines, different things that we sell, whether that's widgets or whether that's services. In our business, we've got the accounting, we've got the FP&A, we got the bookkeeping, we got tax, we've got advisory, all kind of served by different people, different
technologies
here
systems,
inside.
and
which ones, let's just take that. Which ones am I making or losing money on? And we were just having this conversation earlier today over the last 5-6 years of our business, how that has changed, right? But it's all come down to understanding it, that not all services, widgets are made the same, knowing what your gross margin contribution is, and following the 80-20 rule, like not taking this to the nth degree, but comes down to in the design and implementation phase, like segmenting your business, strategically looking at your business. How would I segment my business? What are the different lines of business? And then making sure that your chart of accounts is stratified in a way that you can actually see a gross margin by service line.
So the hazard here is we find that most customers, the majority of our small, medium-sized businesses out there fall into two sides of the spectrum. One that really don't actually measure where I'm making and losing money. And those that go to the nth degree and literally spend time and capital and money trying to capture every single nuance in their sort of financial performance. I always say, it's the 80-20 rule. And that's why we kind of put the 80-20 rule in there. It's like, capture enough information that it helps you drive decisions based on certain performance metrics. So in other words, I'm not going to, if you've never done any of this, right? If you've never done any of this, and if you pull up your P&L and your income statement essentially says, I make $100,000 in revenue and I pay out $75,000 in cost of goods sold. And at the end of the day, I have $25,000. If 80% or 90% of a widget or a service, whatever product line is actually generating to that number, I would almost sometimes say, don't worry about the other number. Meaning, if you've never done this, now there's an evolution to this, right? You can't just turn on the lights from one day to the next, go from just a complete roll-up type of income statement to a highly detailed income statement with underlying KPIs and gross margin contribution by SKU, if you've never done that,
it takes time.
Don't go there.
And it's not worth taking that jump.
It's not.
It's worth taking the jump from point A to B to C to D to get all the way down.
And the reality is, a lot of this information actually exists in other systems, whether it's Stripe or whether it's an enterprise resource planning system. So not everything has to always flow into your general ledger. Sometimes it just does not. It's not worth it, right? So with that, I love the 80-20 rule in this, because you can totally go to town to try to sort of connect the dots on every single product line and SKU that you have. And it's just a total,
it's going to create too much complexity.
You won't be able to manage it and implement it going forward. So the next place. So I actually enjoy this one. I believe that this is one of the Achilles in all sales teams, right? Not understanding who your customer is. Like strategic marketing 101 is all about market segmentation, customer segmentation, understanding the underlying problem, sometimes referred to as the opportunity, and making sure there's a product market fit. And that there is a value proposition in place, intact, that a customer is willing and able to purchase or rent or whatever it is, right? Or finance, right? Understanding that customer segmentation is so critical, because not every customer is a good customer, and not for your business, and not every revenue is really the same revenue. And it's okay to say no. Like I always have the motto in marketing, we never say no to revenue. We always say yes. A little bit of tongue in cheek there. The reality is we do say no, right? We don't pursue it, or we back off. I feel like I've had more and more of these conversations in COVID with some of our customers who have received the PPP money. This is total irony, right? Have received the PPP money. Every small business that is in their industry is clamoring for the same smaller and smaller and smaller pie. And so they're stepping on each other. They're destroying the pricing elasticity in this business. And yet they're using like total limited resources because they think they can afford it because of the PPP money. They're bringing employees back to essentially service or produce or render the product or service that they're trying to produce, but at a much lower price point. I say to them, I would say no to that revenue. Let your competition suffocate. Keep your dry powder for another day. Dry powder meaning your PPP money, your cash in your bank account.
Right.
Because it's not sustainable.
You're not making money on that. So therefore,
and I'm not saying that's the answer to everybody.
Don't focus on that customer.
I'm not saying that's the answer to everybody, right? It's a little bit brushstroke, but I want people to ask themselves, hey, am I thinking through all of the different possibilities? So marketing for profit, it's about not all revenue is the same revenue. Sometimes certain revenue is better suited for a competitor, or a total different like company service provider in a different adjacent market to service?
One of the ways that we've done this, is, even especially maybe even during COVID, but it predates that, is we were here with Brent 3 or 4 weeks ago, talking about how we're doing selling, right? And one of the ways that we do selling is giving away things for free, whether that's just advice. We've done office hours, we do the GrowthLab Jumps, the podcast, or whether it's actual tools, right? We've given out our 13-week cash flow tool, our long range plan tool, our budgeting tool, right? It's hey, if you can do this, go for it, right? Because if you can't afford this, then you are not our customer, but you're going to understand your business better. You're going to grow your business, and then you're going to come back and you're going to be a customer, because 3 years from now, if you're still around, you're going to be that much stronger, that much better, and you're going to know your business, so that when you're managing an outsourced provider, you know what you're looking for.
So I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to jump to metrics, because one of the things I look for when I'm thinking about marketing for profit, not just for revenue, is the customer acquisition cost. And sometimes we think about CAC and LTV as in the world of SaaS-based companies, monthly recurring revenue, and that's not the case. Like even in one-off transactional type of sales, companies should really be keeping an eye on that customer acquisition cost, because that customer acquisition cost creates a lot of slippage, leakage in your P&L, and you don't realize it until it's too late. So
what's when a prospect stays in our pipeline for, let's say, a little too long, whether that's 3 weeks or 3 months, what do we say? It's like, we can't spend any more time with that person.
no.
We can't keep taking those calls, answering those questions. It's attractive. Maybe it's just one more conversation before they pull the trigger, but at some point we got to cut them off, right? Because the customer acquisition cost with each call goes up.
Cool. So next one.
Last one,
5 more
the
minutes.
GrowthLab Four is paying for performance, and this is this traditional pay your employees your performance comp. But it's to achieve company goals. And yes, one of those company goals is to bring in new sales, AKA sales commissions, but it does not stop there by any means.
And we're not talking about Christmas bonuses.
And the companies that really take this to heart and really understand this, it does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, and not just time in front of a whiteboard or spreadsheet to figure out how much they're going to make at their target comp. But this is touched on your culture. This touches on your people, your service lines. Like how are you actually giving them some control over their compensation by paying them for performance? Because you can't pay your marketing guy based on something the service team does, right? You're not paying your sales guy on.
You could to a certain extent.
To company level performance.
Company
right?
level performance.
But you want to give them something that they can control, they can sink their teeth into.
Yeah, I think one of the hurdles, so you're right, you mentioned company culture. That is definitely a big hurdle in setting up a pay for performance program with a focus on excellence, achieving company goals. Like it starts with being transparent with your employees. And by the way, you're going to have employees that are just not going to go with it. And at some point you have to decide, is that employee still a fit? Just like we talked about with the customer. But in order to have a pay for performance framework, it starts, you're right, with culture. And then secondly, I think it goes back to what we were talking about. It's planning. Knowing where you're making and losing money. What are the functional hurdles? What are my product development hurdles? What are my sales targets for my sales team? What is the cost per lead? What is the volume of leads? All of this kind of plays in together. When a nice little piece that we have out there, I was just talking to the entrepreneurial lead professor at the Harvard Business School this morning. He said one of the things that our students have a difficult time, and these are MBAs, right? Harvard Business School. He said one of the places where they're challenged with in sort of their education is being hyper-focused more on the ideation, right? Business ideation, blue sky,
theory,
possibility.
Yeah.
They didn't even mention theory, but it's just like sort of way above the tree line, right? And he said, we're challenged because everybody's here and they really, as a business owner, as a business manager, you need to understand the weeds. I'm not saying get into the weeds, but understanding the intricacies.
Cash conversion.
simple thing. I mean, there is nothing more elementary in a business than understanding your cash conversion, period. So understanding that, understanding employee headcount, understanding resources, understanding product development, all of these things. I like to say, we have this pretty cool article that we wrote probably a year ago, and it's like on page 1 of Google search when you search for business modeling. And it's essentially 10 steps. And I'm kind of bringing into it because the point of that, in those 10 steps, you do begin to learn and be able to articulate what are the top five drivers that impact my bottom line or my company's value. And only once you get there can you begin to achieve pay for performance. By the way, not every company is that complicated, like ours, right? It's not that complicated, but it's only once you'll be able to understand the underlying drivers of your business. So with that,
let's go back to your homework. The homework for this week is what is the action, right? Because often we're looking at spreadsheets, we're looking at numbers so that you can take action on your actual data. This one's a little bit more theoretical as we look at these GrowthLab Four. So really, I got to mull this over, think about these, digest them, understand them, and really kind of be honest with yourself. Which ones do I not have a strong grasp on? Which are my weak points? And which are my strong points? But determine your weak points so that you can work on them, strengthen yourself, and grow. Welcome any questions in the chat. Feel free to message us. Next week we might jump around. We might start with cash flow, but we might jump between the 1, 2, 3, and 4. But we if something comes up, we'll probably jump to something different to make it applicable to your business. Things have been pretty volatile recently, but all the things being the same, over the next few weeks, we will dive into each of these in more greater detail. So do tune in for next Monday, 4 o'clock, next Growth Lab jump.
And let's not forget to mention that by the end of this week, we will have the new updated PPP loan forgiveness calculator application, albeit things may change, but we'll have a video. So we'll have a freemium version where you can download the application. Obviously that's free, right? But you can download the calculator. There's a tutorial video. I think it's like 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long.
Yeah, so our team has really developed a tool for you to calculate your forgiveness, but more importantly for the application, actually spits out your schedule for the application itself, which is based on a lot of detailed information that you're generating as we speak. If you have the PPP loan, you got the 24 weeks to get it forgiven. So a lot of detailed information.
And let's face it, if you've been doing your accounting right and you have a good payroll provider, it shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah. But actually on the podcast we're thinking about for this week is kind of giving you behind the scenes of how we developed that and using the GrowthLab 4 as the framework for that.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of sneak peek into our marketing.
So it'll be fun.
18 months.
Cool. Thanks for joining us. Have a good week. See you next time.